Part 1, a man with no image, but a long shad. There is no statue of Odoacer, no carved portrait, no surviving document bearing his words. A man who brought a 1,000-year-old empire to its knees, left behind not a single symbol. Only a name, a single act, and one historical conclusion: Odoacer ended the Western Roman Empire. But in truth, Odoacer never called himself king, nor did he create a new empire for himself. What he did, simply, was to depose a powerless teenager burdened with a legendary name, Romulus Augustulus. Then he returned the imperial regalia to the Eastern emperor. History remembers this moment as the final full stop of the Western Roman Empire. But perhaps it wasn't an ending at all. Perhaps it was a brutal awakening to a wound that had been festering for far too long. Part 2. Who was Odoacer? A barbarian, a general, or a reformer? We know very little about Odoacer. Was he Ostrogoth, Syri, or simply a mercenary in the Roman army? His blood was certainly not Roman, that much is clear. But his actions were far more Roman than many so-called true citizens. Throughout the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire relied heavily on Germanic mercenary armies. The Franks, Suebi, Burgundians, and a chaotic mix of soldiers hired with gold and promises. Odoacer was one of their commanders. But when the father of Emperor Romulus refused to grant land to the Germanic troops, Odoacer was no longer just a commander, he became a rebel. With force, he seized Ravenna, the political capital of the Western Empire. And without shedding blood, he forced Romulus to abdicate. No execution, no burning, no massacre. He simply sent the imperial crown back to Constantinople. Part 3. Why he claimed the crown? Odoacer had every reason to declare himself king. He controlled the army. He held the capital. He had deposed the emperor. He faced no political rivals, and yet he did not wear the crown. Instead, he wrote to the Eastern Roman Emperor, Zeno, asking to govern Italy on behalf of the empire. This wasn't just political wisdom, it was a profound shift in how power was understood. From symbolic authority to practical control. Rome no longer needed an emperor, it needed a competent administrator. Odoacer became Rex Italii, king of Italy, but only in reality, not in name. No coronation, no Senate decree. Just military strength, administrative skill, and ruthless pragmatism. Part 4. Italy under Odoacer, chaos or stability. History often sees Odoacer as a punctuation mark, the full stop at the end of Rome. But if we stop there, we miss something vital. He ruled Italy for 17 years, and contrary to popular belief, that era wasn't chaotic, it was, in fact, remarkably stable. Odoacer didn't burn temples. He didn't tear down walls. He didn't force the people to learn his language or abandon old traditions. Instead, he preserved the entire Roman administrative system, from governors and consuls to the tax infrastructure. People still went to church, just as they always had. Courts still delivered justice using Roman law. Monasteries kept copying books. Cities still celebrated festivals, worshipped gods, and proudly called themselves Roman citizens. To many Italians of that time, Odoacer wasn't an invader. He felt more like a new manager of a crumbling old system. Church relations with the church, the key to Odoacer's success. Odoacer was not Roman, but he understood something deeply Roman. Religion is power. In an age when emperors had lost their aura, the Pope in Rome had become the spiritual center of the West. Odoacer didn't challenge the church, he supported it. He granted land, waived taxes for certain monasteries, and protected the autonomy of bishops. To the church, he was a heretic but negotiable. They didn't trust him, but they tolerated him because he let them survive. That is why Odoacer's reign is not remembered as part of a dark age. It was a soft transition, a wooden bridge laid hastily across the broken world of Rome toward a future not yet shaped. Dagger, why was he overthrown? If Odoacer was wise, cautious, and refused to claim the crown, why was he still replaced? The answer lies in the East, Constantinople. Emperor Zeno, the man who had received back the crown, never truly trusted Odoacer. Though Zeno formally approved his rule, he secretly appointed someone else, Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths. Zeno gave Theodoric a simple deal. I can't remove Odoacer, but if you do it for me, Rome is yours. Theodoric agreed, and thus a Gothic king was sent to conquer another Gothic king. In the name of Rome, the war didn't start right away. It dragged on, brutal and bloody, and ended in a feast and an axe. Odoacer was invited to peace negotiations in Ravenna. Theodoric rose, embraced him, then stabbed him in the stomach with a concealed dagger. He then ordered the execution of Odoacer's family and generals. Scroll the end of a reign, as if it never happened. Odoacer left no dynasty. No songs or histories praised him. No building bears his name. Even Roman historians called him a blank space in history. But history doesn't only remember those with marble statues. Some stand quietly at the crossroads of eras, holding the world together just long enough to keep it from falling into chaos, then disappear like a silent shadow. Odoacer was one of those. Part 5, the man who ended eternity. History is filled with emperors who burned cities, generals who forged empires, and kings who crowned themselves in blood and marble. Odoacer did none of that. He dismantled no empire, yet somehow his name is forever tied to the end of one. The fall of the Western Roman Empire. The phrase is dramatic, final, almost theatrical. But the reality, it was more like the quiet turning of a key. A boy emperor laid down his crown. A general mailed it back. And an ancient world, once believed eternal, softly exhaled its last breath. Yet to reduce Odoacer's role to mere accident is to miss the quiet revolution he represented. He was not a king, not a senator, not a Roman. He was a barbarian in name and in blood. But when the last embers of Western Rome needed someone to tend to them, it was he, a foreigner, who kept the fire from going out entirely. Odoacer ruled not with glory, but with grit, not with crowns, but with competence. He did not resurrect Rome, but he delayed its burial. In that he was not the destroyer the textbooks imply. He was the undertaker, the man who cleaned the ruins, the steward of collapse. And perhaps, in a world obsessed with conquest and legacy, his greatest act was not what he took, but what he chose not to take. He could have declared a new empire. He could have erected monuments. He could have crowned himself in gold and fire. But instead, he passed the crown. He preserved the peace. He governed what remained, and then, like a shadow on the wall, he vanished. Part 6, Theodoric. The king who wore the crown that Odoacer refused. When Odoacer fell, the Western Roman Empire had already been dead for years, perhaps decades. But in his place rose a figure both similar and entirely different. Theodoric the Great, king of the Ostrogoths. He was everything Odoacer was not. Where Odoacer governed from the shadows, Theodoric stepped into the light. Where Odoacer ruled with pragmatism, Theodoric ruled with grandeur. Where Odoacer refused the symbols of empire, Theodoric embraced them, rebuilding Rome, hosting chariot races, and even wearing purple, the sacred imperial color. Yet Theodoric, too, was not Roman. He was raised in Constantinople as a political hostage, educated in Greek and Latin, trained to fight like a Roman general and think like a Roman politician. But he remained a Gothic king, a barbarian with Roman dreams. When he entered Italy in 488 AD, he did so not as a conqueror, but as a messenger of compromise. Emperor Zeno had sent him to depose Odoacer, yes, but also to restore Rome in whatever form it could still survive. The war between Odoacer and Theodoric was long, brutal, and full of betrayal. But when the dust settled, Theodoric stood over Ravenna not as a foreign warlord, but as the de facto ruler of Italy. And he did what many feared he could not. He revived what was left of Roman governance. He retained the Roman Senate. He preserved the Roman legal system. He allowed Latin culture, Christian faith, and Roman tradition to flourish under his rule. But make no mistake, this was no restoration. There were no emperors anymore, no illusions of eternity. What Theodoric created was something new, a Gothic-Roman hybrid kingdom built not on marble columns, but on the ruins of memory. He ruled for more than 3 decades, far longer than most Western emperors had in the century before. Under him, Italy knew peace again. Roads were repaired, trade resumed, cities breathed, but it was a peace wrapped in contradiction. Romans were ruled by a Gothic king. A Christian bishop shared power with a pagan warlord. Latin law coexisted with Gothic custom. Theodoric had to walk a line as thin as a dagger's edge. To the Romans, he had to look like a civilized monarch. To the Goths, he had to be a proud warrior. And for a time, he succeeded. But when he died in 526 AD, the cracks beneath his carefully laid foundation began to widen. Part 7, The Fragile Peace, after Theodoric and the decline of Gothic Italy. Theodoric's death in 526 AD did not trigger an explosion. It triggered something worse, a quiet collapse, a peace without a protector, a kingdom without glue. His successors lacked his balance, his diplomacy, and above all, his vision. His daughter, Amalasuntha, tried to rule as a Roman regent for her young son. She was educated, fluent in Latin and Greek, a student of Roman culture. But she ruled a court of Gothic warlords who resented her softness, her intellect, her Roman pride. The balance Theodoric had spent decades building between Gothic strength and Roman order began to tilt. Factions formed, tensions grew, and in the shadows of Constantinople, Emperor Justinian I watched with interest. To him, Italy was not a Gothic kingdom. It was still part of the Roman dream, temporarily lost to barbarians. Now, with Theodoric gone and chaos rising, Justinian saw an opportunity to do what emperors hadn't dared for decades. Take it back. And so began one of the most destructive wars in Italian history, the Gothic War, waged from 535 to 554 AD. Led by his brilliant general Belisarius, Justinian launched an invasion from the east. At first, the campaign was dazzling. Sicily fell in weeks. Rome was taken without resistance. But then the war dragged on. Cities changed hands. Famine spread, plague followed. Italy became a battleground of empire, but not for glory, for survival. The Romans who lived through it didn't see a reconquest. They saw ruins. The dream of restoring Rome, the imperium sine fine, turned to ash. By the end of the war, Italy was devastated. Its population shrunk. Its cities emptied. Its fields lay fallow. Yes, Justinian had won, but what he took was a ghost. Part 8, The Aftermath, the end of Roman Italy. After the Gothic War, Italy was officially once again part of the Roman Empire, or at least what remained of it in the East. It was now ruled by Byzantine governors called exarchs from the city of Ravenna. But the victory was hollow. The Rome they restored was a scarred land, no longer the heart of empire, but a distant province clinging to memories. And not for long. In 568 AD, just 14 years after the war ended, a new wave came. A Germanic tribe called the Lombards crossed the Alps and invaded. There was no resistance. The Byzantines were too weak. The Romans too weary. The land too broken. The Lombards established their own kingdom in the north. And once again, Italy was divided between Gothic memories, Byzantine ambitions, and new barbarian realities. Rome, the eternal city, shrank into itself. Its senate faded. Its roads crumbled. Its emperors became icons in mosaics, not men in palaces. But one institution remained and grew stronger through the chaos: the Church. As emperors died and kings fell, the bishops of Rome, the popes, slowly took on the mantle of leadership. Not just spiritual, but political. It was no longer the Caesars who guided Italy. It was the successors of Saint Peter. Part 9, From Emperor to Pope: How the Church Became Rome's Heir. In the ruins of empire, power does not disappear, it transforms. When emperors fell and kings betrayed their thrones, the Roman people looked not to palaces, but to altars. The Church, once a persecuted faith, then a partner of emperors, now became something else entirely: the guardian of Rome's memory and slowly the ruler of its future. The transformation was not sudden. It came with every famine, every plague, every Gothic sword raised, and every Byzantine promise broken. As armies failed to feed the people, it was the bishops who opened granaries. When cities were looted and burned, it was the monasteries that took in the wounded and wrote down the lost knowledge. When there were no kings to be crowned, it was the Pope's voice that held moral authority. And so, over time, the Bishop of Rome became more than a bishop. He became a symbol, not just of Christ, but of order. By the time Pope Gregory the Great rose to power in the late 6th century, the papacy had become what no other Roman institution had managed to be: a bridge between two worlds. Gregory sent missionaries to England. He negotiated with invading Lombards. He organized famine relief in Italy. He reformed the liturgy and defended the poor. He didn't call himself Caesar. But in the eyes of many, he had become more Roman than any emperor left in Constantinople. And that was the final metamorphosis. The Church became Rome, not in title but in spirit. Where once the emperor had ruled in the name of Jupiter and Mars, now the Pope ruled in the name of Christ. Where once Rome sent out legions to conquer, now it sent monks to convert. Where once the Colosseum echoed with blood sport, now cathedrals echoed with chant. And the people, desperate, fragmented, uncertain, embraced this new Rome, not of marble, but of faith. Part 10, Odoacer's Legacy: A Ghost That Changed the World. Odoacer left no statues. No coins bear his face. No chronicles celebrate his name. And yet history bends around his act. He did not plan to become the man who ended Rome. He did not march to make history. He simply acted when others hesitated. In doing so, he revealed a truth many feared to say aloud. Rome had already fallen, not because a city was conquered, not because a senate was dissolved, but because the idea of Rome, as it had existed for 1,000 years, had exhausted itself. Odoacer did not destroy that idea. He merely refused to pretend it was still alive. And so his quiet coup became a punctuation mark on an age. He was not a visionary, he was not a tyrant, he was not even truly a king. But he was a threshold, a liminal figure standing at the doorway between the classical world and the medieval one, between empire and church, between Rome the conqueror and Rome the memory. And that is why we remember him, not for who he was, but for what ended and what began because of him.